So let's talk about solipsism and the philosophical zombie. I had been planning on doing a disquisitional inquest into this subject for some time, and then recently a message of inquiry arrived, posing concerns surrounding this very same question. And even though the message could be slightly disingenuous, as it's a bit of dramatic theatrics and less of existential query, the subject matter is still compelling nonetheless. The philosophical zombie is a quandary to people. Hence, it seems the time is now ripe to address this enigmatic aspect. I have already gone over the philosophical zombie briefly in the past, but nevertheless will now thoroughly analyze and explicate the topic for your consideration. According to the wiki document, the philosophical zombie is described as such, quote, "A philosophical zombie, or P-zombie in the philosophy of mind and perception, is a hypothetical being that from the outside is indistinguishable from a normal human being but lacks conscious experience, qualia, or sentience. For example, if a philosophical zombie was poked with a sharp object, it would not feel any pain sensation, yet could behave exactly as if it does feel pain. It may say, ouch, recoil from the stimulus, and say that it is feeling pain. The notion of a philosophical zombie is used mainly in thought experiments intended to support arguments, often called zombie arguments, against forms of physicalism, such as materialism, behaviorism, and functionalism. Physicalism is the idea that all aspects of human nature can be explained by physical means. Specifically, all aspects of human nature and perception can be explained from a neurobiological standpoint. Some philosophers, such as David Chalmers, argue that since a philosophical zombie is defined as physiological indistinguishable from human beings, even its logical possibility would be a sound refutation of physicalism. However, physicalists like Daniel Dennett counter that Chalmers' physiological zombies are logically incoherent and thus impossible. Unquote. Interesting. And with that, the table is now set for the topic of discussion. Now let's move on to the message that arrived a few days ago that was specifically addressing the question of the philosophical zombie. The message reads as follows, quote, "Through your help it has been concluded that solipsism, destiny, perfect sequence, along with perfection as well as simulation or stream, which is projected from an unknown source, are definitely undeniable elements of the actual reality. I do not have a problem with the truth, that only the self exists, that everyone else is merely a moving corpse that cannot hear, feel, or see. It does not hurt me the fact that my friends and family are all unconscious, non-existent corpses of my imagination, and that I am only having a perception of being a human being. The only thing that I cannot survive of thinking of, and never will, which is the actual reality and my real problem, is that since none and nothing exists, it automatically means that my soulmate, my other half, the person who is above all and everything in my life, my wife, is unconscious too. That in turn means that she cannot see, hear, or sense. She does not know who I am. She does not even know who she is, and that she is just a zombie. This is crushing my heart. It breaks me apart, and sadly, this is how it is. Why would the universe, Mother Nature, God, or any creator of this stream design a spiritual being with real emotions and senses to be fitted with a dead, heartless zombie, or a movable object with no soul? That is not right, and does not fit the pattern of perfection. I do not want to spend my spiritual journey alone without her, who is my soulmate, my goddess, my real, true, and only one love, that I have infinite, unconditional love for, her and only her. As for family, I do not want to create a fake family of philosophical zombies that will ruin my life. I do not want to let nothing destroy my journey. So, if you could offer me your supreme advice for that problem that I face, I greatly appreciate it. Unquote. Indeed. This message typifies the classic existential conundrum posed to a philosopher by the concept of the philosophical zombie. But in order to flesh out, so to speak, this ideological snag, and yes, pun intended, it's significant to recognize the specifics of the truth that are relative to this type of mental anxiety. It's a philosophical conundrum caused by a concept of something, not by any actual interactive functionality. Hence, this is a matter of abstractions, not a matter of any empirical circumstances. Although often overlapping, pain and suffering are not the same phenomena, despite the average man's desire to conflate them. Pain is a physical sensation. Suffering is a psychological narrative. We often torment ourselves unnecessarily with the negative stories we like to tell ourselves, which only reinforce self-disempowerment and sustain a victim mentality. One should really examine this when one believes one is in a state of existential angst. How much of this anxiety is due to actual physical pain, and how much of this anxiety is due to just thought patterns running programs inside the head. I think you'd be surprised to learn that about 85% of our torment is due to just pure abstraction soup. And this is what the philosophical zombie is, a purely intellectual issue. The concept of the philosophical zombie is often used in thought experiments to counter arguments posited by materialists, but is also sometimes used by materialists themselves in rebuttal to the assertions of solipsism. This proposition is referred to as the problem of the philosophical zombie, but it really isn't a problem to the solipsists. The philosophical zombie is only a problem to materialists, or to solipsists with materialist leanings, as is the case with the so-called weak solipsism, a category I thoroughly detest, reject, and discard as either haplessly confused or malignantly disingenuous, depending on the particular stance assumed by the anti-idealist at hand. How is it a problem to just present the idea of a problem, of a philosophical zombie, and then demand that the solipsist resolve it? This by itself isn't a reinforcement of materialism, as the insinuations of the posed problem alone aren't an ample enough refutation of any solipsistic implications. But don't get me wrong, it's also equally subpar as an argumentative device when used by idealists as a refutation of physicalism. So overall, the philosophical zombie concept in general is a bit of a weak ideological contrivance, mostly due to the fact that no matter how it's applied, it's fallacious, as the whole position is grounded in unchecked assumptions and a bias towards objectivity. You dig that? A weak solipsist will use the philosophical zombie as a means to debunk physicalism, all the while still paying homage to materialism and objectivity. So just pondering the question, am I the only being with a consciousness, is already getting it wrong before any resolution to the idea of a problem can even be postulated. It's the wrong kind of question, as to compose an argument in this way is to frame the discourse on a foundation of materialism. A solipsist worth his salt doesn't bother wasting time engaging in dialogue that is predicated upon a false premise. Even just the word zombie denotes flesh and blood physicality, considering the self to be an embodiment that has the capacity to be all alone, also connotes a foundation of materialism. To even get caught up in jumping through hoops to satisfy materialist expectations is to agree to play the game by somebody else's rules. Rules that are based on a lie, for that matter. Don't be an obedient dog that plays fetch. We've seen these types of tactics before, also often used in the past by theists in argumentation. You lose the argument simply by not questioning the question. Don't even bother with trying to answer them. Instead, dissect every one of their flimsy premises, as 95% of arguments made by all people are loaded to the hilt with a multitude of false presuppositions. Add to that a splash of hyperbolic distortion, and you've got yourself a nice typical bullshit argument. A toxic cocktail of fear, paranoia, and anxiety. So the whole basis to the anxiety felt by the author of the message is based completely on abstractions, and abstractions formulated on an erroneous premise to boot. Look, in illusion there are characters, a self, others. They interact. Many of them love each other. Some of them hate each other. This is witnessed. It's an interesting piece of theater, to be sure. But there's absolutely no reason to feel anxiety about any of this due to a concept about a philosophical zombie. The major reason why this happens is due to a misidentification of the self. You are not a character. You are not a persona. You are not the body that seems to be attached to the point of view that peeks out from the eyeballs. Stop identifying as an embodiment. Then other embodiments will not pose a problem either. They are of the same fabric. Only the self exists, yes. But the self isn't any assumed identity. The self is the awareness that breathes life into all identities. If you wish to chalk others off as philosophical zombies, then you must also chalk off this personality you've attached an identity to as a philosophical zombie as well. Every bit of existence is based in awareness. Hence, it is not fundamentally physical or material. Thus, there can be no moving object without a soul. As there really is no such thing as an object. Ergo, no such thing as a flesh and blood philosophical zombie. Just as the case during your sleeping dreams. The dream isn't a multiplicity. It's one stream. When you dream of an assumed identity, other identities, environments, and concepts. But upon awakening, the truth of the assumed identity, other identities, environments, and concepts are revealed for what they are. All features of the unified dream field of pure awareness. You realize upon awakening that the real you was in fact none of those things. You are not a thing. The real you is what is aware of all things. Understanding this, what can be said about investments into how these appearances arrange and rearrange? It's simply not a phenomenon to create any anxiety over. All dream phenomena is illusion. What is there to miss? What is there to preserve? What is there to save? What is there to uphold? Nothing goes anywhere, and yet everything passes into nothing.